In a landmark move, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda have signed a peace accord in Washington, signaling a potential breakthrough after decades of bloody conflict. The deal, brokered by the United States, calls for the withdrawal, disarmament, and conditional integration of armed groups in eastern DR Congo. U.S. President Donald Trump, including delegations of both African countries who were at the Oval Office, hailed the agreement as a brilliant victory that ushers in a new chapter of hope and opportunity. Now, analysts urge caution, highlighting that previous deals have unraveled without clear enforcement, accountability, or regional buy-in. But still, this pact marks a rare moment of alignment between the U.S., DR Congo, and Rwanda, with significant geopolitical and economic stakes, including potential access to the region's mineral wealth. So today I am joined by Nixon Katembo, an analyst at Great Lake and East Africa. And of course, he joins me from Johannesburg in South Africa. Nixon, thank you so much for joining us on the show. And of course, we have Patrick Kadima, a lecturer at Wits University. He also joins me from Johannesburg in South Africa. Patrick, Nixon, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Can you please unmute your device and say something? Okay. All right, good evening. So let me start with Nixon anyway, even as we kickstart this conversation. Now, Nixon, are you happy and relieved about this peace agreement occasioned by the United States?
Of being happy, but rather a question of the implication of the deal itself in terms of justice to prevail in the Congo over the atrocity that have been committed by the rebel, as well as successive rebellion that happened in the country since 1998, both of which are rooted and supported by Rwanda. That's one aspect. The second aspect is perhaps the socio-economic justice that is denied the people of the Congo through this deal to chart their own economic path, but rather that economic path dictated by the United States through its accession to rare mineral earth of the DRC, but all other critical mineral resources of the country. And I should mention that this is not the first time the United States getting involved in the DRC, to the extent of even leading to the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, its first democratically elected prime minister in 1960s. So it's a long history, and for me, I see it as a continuation of hoarding resources of the DRC at the expense of the people and the country's development. And that this cannot be accepted by any reasonable mind when you look at the geopolitical dynamics changes within the region, but also at a global level. The third point that I should mention, that also this deal reward those who have been committing atrocities and therefore allow impunity to continue in Eastern DRC without ever having a sense of accountability for the atrocities that have been committed.
Okay, so Nixon, the war, you are more concerned about the mineral loss and the atrocities committed during the course of the conflicts between the M23 rebels, let's even say all the rebel groups, and DRC in that particular region. But then we are going to talk more about this, and where I'm still going to get Patrick's opinion about this also. But I'd like Nixon and Patrick to stay with me for a while. You are still watching the conversation anyway on the Central Television, and we have been looking at the issue around the pact being facilitated by the United States. Of course, the President, Donald Trump, bringing Rwanda and DR Congo leaders, Paul Kagame, and of course Felix Tshisekedi to the table in Washington a few days ago to sign a pact to bring an end to the crisis in the region and to see that all the warring rebel group in that area down tools and come to the table to dialogue. But then one of the major issue with that particular agreement deal was the fact that the United States President Donald Trump talked about mineral resources being given, or the access being provided according to what he said, from that corridor down into the U.S. And that's been a bone of contention for so many people, most especially thought leaders and analysts in Africa, talking about how that would benefit Africans or benefit Rwanda and DR Congo more than the U.S. We have been talking to Nixon Katembo, analyst at Great Lake and East Africa, and of course Patrick Kadima, lecturer at Wits University. And of course, a while ago, Nixon shared his thoughts as regards how U.S. would be the one to benefit more in terms of resource control. But then I'd like to take Patrick's own opinion as regards this, if he's also relieved about the fact that finally peace comes to that particular region. Patrick.
Good evening, and good evening to your viewers. So first of all, you should welcome, this peace agreement that has been signed in the United States of America. Why? Because the conflict in the eastern part of the DRC has not been a conflict just that has African interest in it, but it has been a conflict that has had a lot of international, whether it is actors, or factors in it. And therefore, I'm very skeptical, and I do not agree with colleagues that, continue to say, why was this not agreement signed in Africa and so on and so forth. I mean, we have a plethora of examples of how conflicts in Africa that have been tried to be solved in Africa have failed, over the years. We have the Nairobi process that was a failure. We have the Pretoria Accords that tried to solve the conflict here in the eastern of the DRC when Mbeki was also president or deputy president at the time, and it failed dismally. So why should we not give a chance to the United States of America to try to draft a peace plan between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda in order to try to implement peace in that region? So we need to give this Washington Accord, as they say it. It will be known as the Washington Accords, hopefully. We need to give this peace framework a chance for it to see how it's going to go. People say that you mentioned earlier about the conflicts, the minerals that America is interested. I think the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of Congo was very clear on that, and says that yes, there are talks about American companies and American government trying to push investors in the Congo to try access these critical minerals. But there is going to be a separate economic agreement between the Democratic Republic of Congo and the United States of America. For now, the peace deal, as she says, is that does not include anything on the minerals and so on and so forth. So yes, for all his faults and for all his criticism that he takes Donald Trump, I think for one, we need to give this peace framework a chance. I mean, how many countries have tried to step in and try to solve this conflict and they failed? So why should it not be signed in Washington? What's the problem? Why, if it failed in Nairobi, it failed. In Rwanda, it tried to kick off, but it failed. And out of all these processes in the region, in fact, the Rwanda process was the most effective that was trying to achieve sustainable peace in the region, but it ended up failing. We saw Qatar also getting involved, but ended up being in Washington as well, so that it could amalgamate its efforts with the United States of America and trying to find a lasting solution in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So let us give this chance, let us give this framework a chance and not criticize it as early as it is, and wait for the heads of state to move to Washington and put ink to paper and seal it.
Okay, so Nixon, between 1999 and 2025, there have been about 16 peace deals signed to end the conflict in the region, but all of it had failed. Now, how are we so sure that this so-called Washington Accord will not fail?
I'm afraid that the Washington Accord is likely to face the same fate of this previous 16 deal that you've signed on, you've talked about, for the simple reason being that there have not been a demonstrable political will on the part of those involved in this conflict to make sure that there is an end to the conflict. That is one aspect. The second aspect is related to the various stakeholders within the DRC itself. Here I'm talking about the political class and the opposition. This is not just about the M23 alone, but there are also other political tensions within the DRC that seeks to suggest that there will be a need for re-engagement of political dialogue on the way forward of the DRC. The other aspect, to look at the regional dynamics within the Great Lakes region, but also we talked about the African Union and the involvement of other countries within the region as far as the DRC is concerned. Now, you adding that, you add the United Nations, which is involved in the DRC. It's nowhere, it has been mentioned in this particular deal as a part and parcel of finding a solution to the problem of the DRC. So how then a deal signed between two presidents that relates to the M23, but also in some sort of legalizing the invasion of the DRC by Rwanda and giving impetus, underscoring what Rwanda has been accusing the DRC of in terms of the FDLR. How will that really come to an end in bringing about peace in the DRC? And for me, whoever thinks that this is the end of it all, we will be really telling lies here. That is just the end of it. Of course, it's not suggest that the deal should be watered down, but rather to be looked at in a broader context of how the DRC has come this far from the various conflicts that has happened in that country, but also its position in the global context, the geopolitical contestations. For example, if you talk about the signing of a mineral deal between the United States and the DRC, what about other major powers such as China? We would recall that the DRC has signed the previous deal for mineral, for infrastructure worth about $34 billion. And these are mining concessions that have been ceded to, for example, to the Chinese. How do you marry all of these issues together to make sure that the country is at peace and somehow it gets some economic development? And therefore, this leads me to take a position of caution to suggest that this deal is going to bring about peace in DRC.
Okay. Now, I understand. Patrick, now we've had the UN, the MONUSCO, under the UN intervene in a way or two. We've also had SADC provide forces. But then it's quite interesting that it has to take the US to broker this peace deal and not the AU, is one of the things that Nixon just talked about. And a lot of people felt that the AU had largely remained quiet and somehow turned a blind eye. Do you think that the AU could have done more to end this conflict in the DRC than it, the way we see it, has done?
Yeah, first of all, MONUSCO is a peacekeeping force. that and their role is limited, right? And it has been, this was due to obviously a United Nations Security Council resolution and so on and so forth. But speaking about it before I depart and answer your other questions on SADC and the African Union, we need to accept one thing. There was, or there is, the outgoing member of of the African region in the United Nations Security Council, such as Sierra Leone, which refused countless times, of certain weddings in the United Nations Security Council drafts, that were going to be put to vote. When Congo was trying to, the Democratic Republic of Congo was trying to say, call out Rwanda, you need to call out Rwanda explicitly, you need to be very explicit about it. And Sierra Leone, as one of the African countries, was very reluctant about that. And it was certain European countries that were putting pressure to call it out, and certain other countries from other areas of the world. So it's not always in your best interest that your own African countries have it's not always straightforward that African countries will support you when it's time to try to broker a deal. Look, SADC using its pact called its pact that says that a defense, an attack to one of our member states is an attack to all of us. And SADC implemented that pact, that resolution, to say we are going to intervene in the Democratic Republic of Congo to try restore order, peace and order there. But unfortunately, I think for the SADC mission, they did not study properly the situation and the complexities in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They went there largely relying on the Democratic Republic of Congo's finances, as well as South Africa's finances, which were contributing to this force. And therefore, that was very difficult, because these two countries, at the end of the day, tried to also find money elsewhere to continue financing this shortfall that they had. So it was not that, it was, this is my point, and I stand to be corrected. I do not think that other SADC countries, despite agreeing to the intervention, were interested in the issue in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And on the AU has failed largely. It's an organization that I've said that needs reform, institutional reform that needs to happen. And if it does not happen, the sooner we will just have an organization that is just there to release press statements and so on and so forth. You would expect that the African Union would intervene in the issues of the Democratic Republic of Congo very strongly than SADC, because it has, and I think that it has left, if we look at it critically, it has left its role in solving the conflicts in the continent largely to sub-regional organizations. It has left issues to ECOWAS to sort out its own problems. It has left issues to SADC to solve its own problems, to the East African community to solve its problem. We cannot have a regional organization such as the African Union continuing in its own format. Okay. Institutional reforms need to happen. If it needs to be effective, it will need the required financial packages to implement these conflicts. Otherwise, it will remain a weak organization, in my view.
All right. Now, Nixon, let's even look at Rwanda. This is a country that for decades denied involvement in this crisis, and even said it does not and has never backed the M23 rebel group. There have been speculations that Rwanda is being supported by foreign powers to perpetrate this so-called violence in that particular region. But then you would also want to look at it from the angle of Rwanda betraying or maybe backstabbing another African country like the DR Congo, probably because of historical ethnic issues or maybe resource control. But then when you put Rwanda into this picture, because it was part of those that sat at the table to sign this deal, how would you describe Rwanda under Paul Kagame?
First of all, if you look at the history of Rwanda from 1994 up until today, is a country supported by the United States, by the United Kingdom, France, Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, Israel, depending on the particular interest that those countries that I've just said are in Rwanda and in the DRC through the current leadership in Kigali. Now, if you look at its military has been built on a base of various support from the US and the UK and Israel specifically. Of course, there are later training that happened, maybe in the technological changes that have happened. For example, the drone technology that have been offered to Rwanda by Turkey and Poland in the latest venture that they have been dealing with in Eastern DRC. Now, the way it is engaging the DRC, it engaged the DRC on a basis of these various interests that these countries are pulling the string. You would recall that Rwanda's economy is basically a donor-funded economy until recently, when it was boosted by the resources that have been looting from Eastern DRC, but also under which Rwanda has sort of managed to create what we would call a service industry that then gives Kigali an upper hand on, over the DRC, where the mayhem continues. So you cannot talk about Rwanda without talking about the support of the United States, the support of the UK, and the support of France. One typical example of such a deal is Patrick Pouyanné, the CEO of Total Energy, who was in Kigali in December 2023, trying to iron out a deal on oil extraction in a Virunga Albertine block, which is coming from which refinery already have started in Uganda, in the area called Ntoroko. Now you look at part of the key questions like energy production. If you look at the Ruzizi Valley Dam, which is owned by Total Energy, about 20%, have been formed part of this deal, although it is not talked about in a clear terms. So you cannot talk about Rwanda without, because this is a proxy of Western powers in the Great Lakes region. And it is not surprising that the United States is handling this particular crisis of the DRC in a manner that is handling it, because of a prior engagement with the Rwandan government. And going forward, unfortunately for the DRC, there hasn't been a strategic leadership in the country to make sure that the interest of the country comes first. Second, a defining a political culture within the country that seeks to look at first interest of the country, draw the country into a strategic positioning vis-a-vis its natural resources and the rest of the world competing for it. And I think once you have those internal weaknesses in the DRC on the part of the leadership there and the political class, it's not surprising that Rwanda is gaining even an upper hand in terms of these negotiations. And you hear about the Rwandese boasting about, talking about the DRC admitting that they are going to deal with the FDLR. On the other hand, DRC ceding its key position of pushing for the withdrawal of the Rwandan forces from the DRC. So it's really amazing on how such a deal can be signed at the expenses of the long-term prospect of the country, economically and otherwise socially.
So that is where a lot of people are actually having issues. in terms of whose interest is being served and who will benefit more from this peace deal. But then we're going to talk more about this. We need to quickly go on a break right now. And when we return, we'll pick it from that particular angle. Who benefits more? We'll be back in a bit. It's The Conversation. There's been about 29 years of conflict in the DRC between the Congolese forces and, of course, over 140 rebel groups, but most notably the M23 rebel group, allegedly said to be sponsored by Rwanda. Well, Rwanda has for decades come out to deny that particular allegation, that it does not and has never sponsored the M23 rebel, who has actually seized some key strategic cities in the DRC. And now we understand that the U.S. president has been able to broker a deal between these two countries with the hope that Felix Tshisekedi of the DRC and, of course, Paul Kagame of Rwanda will be visiting Washington, D.C. very soon to actually ratify this peace deal, as there have been calls for disarmament and a ceasefire in the region. But then the question will always be, who benefits more? Is it the people? Is it DRC? Is it Rwanda? Is it the United States that, according to the president, will be getting a lot of mineral resources? Now, I've been talking to Nixon Katembo, an analyst at Great Lake and East Africa, and I also have Patrick Kadima, who is a lecturer at Wits University. So I quickly go to Patrick now and ask, now the U.S. will receive significant mineral rights as part of the deal. We talked about it before. Then when you place it side by side, whether or not this is part of the deal, ink on paper, would you say that this is a price too high to pay for peace in the DRC?
Sorry, in terms of, may you please repeat again?
So I said that according to what the U.S. president said, he said a lot of mineral resources or mineral rights would be given, will be accorded to the United States. It's part of the deal, whether it's not ink on paper. But the question will always be that, is that, or would that be a price too high to pay for peace, so for us to see peace in the DRC?
Yeah, thank you, sir. No, look, let me just, my colleague here had said, there is no strategic leadership in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But I want to address that quickly, and I think I have a different view. You can have a country that has, over the years, had dictators and so on and so forth. Then you have a democratically elected president that is trying by all means to try build, the country, and he's not going to do it within his democratically elected term when he leaves at the end of the term, because I think he's left with, I don't know how many years, 3 years, 4 years, I don't know. But he's not going to be able to do that, right? But the DR Congo over the years, over the Tshisekedi term, if one studies very carefully, has grown its place in the international relations space. It has grown so much that the country is now visible. That was not visible before his predecessor. That is now trying to destabilize the Democratic Republic of Congo. But in terms of the minerals, what I'm going to say is that, like I have highlighted, this has been a separate deal, as the minister said. This issue of giving mineral rights to American investors is in a separate deal. I don't think if it is made on a win-win situation, that it is going to be a price too high to pay. Look, the Chinese have been in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We know of the Chinese mining companies that have been having several mineral rights in the Democratic Republic of Congo in return for building hospitals, roads, economic development, and so on and so forth. But it has done nothing, in terms of the conflict in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Right, and if we need to critically assess its role of whether they have been doing what they've been doing in terms of giving out building or developing the economy. One sees that no, they have not been doing that. Hence, Tshisekedi had to go to Beijing, meet with the Chinese president, and try to get a win-win situation, because it seems that the funds were going into personal accounts of people, right, from the previous administration. And we know China's position in terms of conflicts is to not interfere in domestic issues. So how do you want to have a superpower like that does not want to solve the conflicts, but is guaranteeing you that they will develop? How do you develop an economy when the eastern part of the country is in war. So yes, look, if the economic agreement between the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Chinese, and the Americans is a win-win, let it go on. We are all for investors on the basis that there is a win-win situation. But we need to caution as well that this agreement or separate economic agreement that will be signed by the Democratic Republic of Congo and the United States of America needs to benefit the Congolese people in the long run. It should not be that will only benefit one side, But I do welcome this peace agreement, and if it is a peace agreement that the American government will look to enforce without fail and put its energy on it in exchange for economic cooperation and investment in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So let it be, because the children and the women in that region have suffered a lot. They've suffered a lot with promises and agreements that have been signed and that have been failed to be enforced. And yes, my colleague is right that he says that Rwanda has been supported by Western powers for far too long. And yes, it is true, correct. It is very correct. And we have seen countries such as France and the Total Energy and so on and so forth supporting Rwanda's aggression and violating the territorial sovereignty of the Democratic Republic of Congo. But we have at the same time countries such as Belgium, coming out and criticizing Rwanda and so on and so forth. So we need to wait and see how this peace framework that has been signed in Washington works out. If it fails, then it is, there are obviously scant deals, to be fair. I'm not worshiping this framework without criticism. There are scant details that have not been revealed to the public. We know a few issues. It's not transparent, and therefore we need a transparent peace framework. Okay. We need to give it a chance, and let's see how it works, because we have given how many peace agreements chances.
So we are sure that we're going to get details of this peace deal probably in the coming days. But Patrick, I like the fact that you mentioned that there's a need for this peace, so to speak, and everything that will be going on in the DRC moving forward will benefit the people. And that is where we need to draw a question mark, and I'll put it to Nixon. Before now, DRC's resources have not really improved the living standards of the people in the country. And now President Donald Trump came out to say that we are getting a lot of mineral rights as part of the deal. One would probably think maybe this has been the game plan or the end goal from the get-go, because one would also want to consider if U.S. would be benefiting more. How does this now benefit or translate into helping people in DRC live a better life?
To think that this time the mineral deal is going to benefit the people of the DRC is to be naive. Let's look at the history of the United States in the Congo. How did it benefit the people of the Congo? And the US supporting Mobutu for over 30 years of dictatorship. And he was replaced by the very same United States that supported him. And you recall that the United States Embassy in Kinshasa was actually the point of the CIA operation in sub-Saharan Africa, the biggest embassy in sub-Saharan Africa at the time, looking at the US interest in the region. I don't think that it's different from what is happening. Look, the US is here for its own interest, doesn't care about the people of the DRC. Rather, what we see, in my own view, is Tshisekedi as a president trying to survive through his regime, and therefore having the US on his side to make sure that he finishes his term. But if you get on the other side of Rwanda, having faced much criticism from the international community, as my colleague pointed with Belgium coming out, an outcry of atrocity that they have committed, they also had, on the other hand, to accept that the current situation cannot continue, or else they are going to be on the receiving end of the backlash from the international community, and therefore sign this deal. But if you come back to the M23, already they have said that what was signed in Washington does not engage them. And how far do we understand that Rwanda is going to rein in on the M23 to make sure that they stop fighting? We've just had the declaration from the former President Joseph Kabila, who by now we know that he supports the M23, or rather, I would dare say that he's the leader of the M23, but through Rwanda. And we're seeing a double game here, and people should not fall for this deal as an all-out encompassing process of bringing peace in the DRC. What I know for sure, that Rwanda might say that, okay, those are Congolese issues, the M23 have chosen to fight, we have none of this, we have signed the deal, we have demonstrated our political will, that we are not engaged in this conflict, however much it is continued, we don't know. Therefore, giving Rwanda what they call a plausible deniability as being part of the continuation of the war. And that is a major issue that we need to take into account. The political dynamics within the Congo, the internal divisions, the many other armed groups that are still in Eastern DRC. Moreover, proxies that have been created by both Rwanda and Uganda to continue the mayhem in Eastern DRC and therefore continuing the looting of resources. If you look at this deal, Uganda has not been mentioned either in terms of where that particular country lies its interest. You will know that they have been in collaboration with the Kinshasa government, and to a certain extent controlling a big chunk of the territory of the DRC by deploying Ugandan troops in the territory such as Beni, Lubero, Mambasa, and part of Ituri, as well as places like Jugu in northeastern DRC. So these are issues that have to be looked at holistically when you say that this deal is going to bring about peace. I'm afraid the issue of peace in the DRC is up for the Congolese themselves to chart the way of the country. Design new institutions, craft those institutions in a way that they will respond to the needs of the Congolese people, and making sure that they strengthen the capacity to make sure that those institutions live up to the aspirations of the people.
All right. Now,
let me quickly... The DRC will not come from Washington or elsewhere.
Okay, Nixon, thank you very much. Let me quickly get...
the way forward.
Yes, a couple of things you actually raised, which are actually concerning. I quickly want to get Patrick's thoughts on this. There have been calls for the withdrawal of Rwandan troops. We're talking about 7,000 of them. And of course, Nixon also raised a critical point as regards other rebel groups. I mentioned earlier over 140 of them, but then pivotal is the M23. We still have the FDLR and some other groups. Are you confident, Patrick, because you've called for patience and understanding, are you confident that Paul Kagame will be able to rein in and call for these troops or these groups to actually disarm and come to the table to ensure peace in the area?
Nixon says that after the signing of this agreement, there is a chance that Rwanda can go on and plausibly deny that their involvement is, they are still involved in the conflict. They have always denied that they're involved in the conflict. So why are they going to side in Washington if they've always denied that? That's my question. They've always denied that they have soldiers in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Investigations from credible media houses have found credible evidence from the United Nations has found that Rwanda is backing the M23 rebels. They have found that M23 rebels have also had goods in their hand that have, or food that have Rwanda Defense Force labels there. So whether Rwanda denies it just to deny it, there is evidence. You can deny something, but there is evidence that one has been involved in a certain type of aggression or violating the territorial sovereignty of another country. So I think Rwanda, after signing this deal, it's up to the American government to put pressure now on both parties to respect their ends of the deal. The other rebel groups, I know they are involved. We are aware of that, and that we have been told as well that the Doha talks will continue on the sideline to have these rebel groups sit down and engage the Congolese government. And that should happen. I know President Tshisekedi said he'll never negotiate with any rebel group. He has a point there. He has a point that a sovereign state, an elected president, should never speak to armed groups that are supported by various people with different intentions. Today we have Kabila, who has been here in South Africa or wherever he has been staying in Namibia, meeting with Mbeki, who have a different view on the Democratic Republic of Congo. Both of them need to rest. They are former presidents. They need to sit in their farms or sit wherever they are sitting and continue their lives and not interfere with the current situation that is happening or the peace processes that are happening. I mean, Mbeki had his chance to give a peace deal. He failed at it. Okay. Kabila himself was president of the Democratic Republic of Congo. He failed at a chance to instill peace. So they need to sit out. The Tshisekedi government needs to now come to the party, speak also to the rebels. Unfortunately, even though the Congo is a sovereign state, I think it needs to speak to these rebel groups at the Doha talks and try to find a solution to that, because enough is enough for these women and children that are in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo that are seeking peace. They cannot be sleeping by night and listening to gun and missiles and also waking up in the morning to these conflicts. It should come to an end.
Well, we hope it will eventually come to an end. I mean, the crisis and this peace will be lasting for the sake of the people in the DRC. Thank you so much, Patrick Kadima, lecturer at Wits University, and Nixon Katembo, analyst at Great Lake and East Africa. Thank you so much for your time on the show. And as the world watches closely, hopes remain high that this latest accord will succeed where others have failed, delivering lasting peace to a region long plagued by violence. But with trust still fragile and, of course, rebel groups yet to fully commit, well, the real test lies ahead on the ground in Eastern DRC as far as this peace agreement is concerned. Well, that's the end of today's edition of The Conversation. You can catch up on all the episodes you might have missed. And, of course, today's on our YouTube channel at News Central Television. And, of course, you can watch us on DSTV channel 422, Go TV, channel 23, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV, and YouTube. Until some other time, I am Lekon Onabanjo. Enjoy your day.